Now, of course, it's time for this week's Friday Focus, and for the first time in its 106-year history, the Royal College of Nurses, or the RCN, has voted to move ahead with strike action. That's after it balloted its 300,000 members. Now, the college says that its members have seen pay fall by, in real terms, 20%. That's since 2010, and they're unhappy with the government's offer of a 4.7% pay rise, which is well below inflation. And that, of course, combined with the fact that nurses are badly overstretched due to record nursing vacancies, it's said that they have pushed them over the edge. However, if the strike does go ahead, the impact on patients will be immense. That's us, Thousands of operations will have been cancelled and postponed, making the backlog even worse. So for this week's Friday Focus, I'm asking why nurses are being paid so poorly and looking at whether it's time to restructure the NHS. Joining me to talk about this is Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, Mark Francois. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Now, the other time we spoke was after you'd been at the Public Accounts Committee and you were discussing all the situation with the over top-heavy bureaucracy of the NHS and the way it sort of operates. Do you think it's time now that we need to seriously look at restructuring it?
No, good evening. The first thing I should do, if we're going to talk about pay, is declare an interest, because my wife works as a clinician in the NHS, so I think I should share that. You kindly referred to the Public Accounts Committee hearing that I and others were present at last week. We established during that hearing that about 75% of the entire NHS budget goes on the pay of NHS staff. And then obviously you've got the operating costs of hospitals, and then you've got the drug bill. And then that leaves relatively little money left, for capital improvements and refurbishment and so on, and such like. But I think there'll be a lot of public sympathy, particularly after the way that they performed during the pandemic, for giving nurses a decent pay rise. But I just think, with the current public finances as they are, and ask for up to about, I think it's 17%, actually, I think realistically the country just couldn't afford. I think the question is, what could we realistically afford? And, without then underfunding other critical areas of the NHS as well. But clearly, without well-qualified staff, the whole thing won't work. So somehow we have to strike a balance.
Well, what about the bureaucracy within it, though? The top-heavy structure.
On that point,
the management.
Interestingly, I think the Telegraph revealed in the week that NHS England now has over 400 senior NHS bureaucrats who earn over £100,000 a year, which is a lot. And of those, over 100 earn £150,000 a year or more, which is getting pretty close to what the Prime Minister earns for running the country.
Yeah.
So I think there's a legitimate debate to be had about whether or not the NHS has become, if you like, top-heavy in terms of the number of very highly paid managers that you've got. And I think to some degree that is affecting, morale, as it were, at the coalface. And also a lot of, clinical staff will tell you, certainly privately, that, they have to deal with a massive amount of bureaucracy every day just in order to do their job. One described it to me once as a vortex of bureaucracy. So, down the years, governments of both colours have closed a lot of smaller hospitals, what often used to be called cottage hospitals. And there's been a process of centralisation in large, high-tech district general hospitals around the country. This has been a trend for years. And you'll find in most of those district general hospitals, you've now got multiple layers of management sitting above the actual clinical staff. Now, some of those managers, in fairness, do have a clinical background or training, but many of them don't. If you like, they're, quote, civilians. And sometimes the clinical staff feel that those people that run the hospital aren't always properly in touch with some of the pressures that they as clinical staff face day to day. So if we're going to put more money into the health service, and remember at the end of the day, it's taxpayers' money we're talking about, there's no magic money tree, then I think we do need to look very carefully at how effectively that money is spent. I think my constituents don't resent paying taxes to fund the NHS, but quite rightly, they want value for money. And I'm sure that's the same, for taxpayers all over the country. So again, we've got to get the balance right.
I think that's it, really. I mean, they're wasting so much money. Stay right there, Mark. Also joining me is a psychiatric nurse, Julia Taylor. Julie, thank you so much for joining. It's good to talk to you again. Right, so the nurses, I think they're underpaid. Why do you think, though, that they're underpaid? Because it just seems a bit ridiculous that we have a system where people at the coalface doing the real nitty-gritty aren't really being paid as much as the people who are just restructuring and pushing paper about. I appreciate that some of them are needed, but surely a lot of them can go.
You know what? I think we're so badly paid, Nana, because we're taken for granted, because for most of it, it's a vocation, not a job, and it's kind of used against us by governments, not the government, in power. And there's a general misconception that because nurses care so much that they're just going to accept any pay and they'll do it just to do the job that they love. And 89% of NHS nurses are female. Is that another reason? Is that something we need to talk about? I don't know. But at the risk of sounding like a raging feminist, which I'm not really, it's just a question that makes me think, how come if there was loads of men there, 89% men, would it still be the same, I wonder? You know where I'm coming from when I say that? Yeah.
I think you make a valid point, actually. It's something that I hadn't really thought about. But in general, I mean, we've seen that women often get paid a lot less than the men in doing the same role. What do you think, then, in terms of, I mean, you're not going, or are you going on strike as well, or are you drawn into the strike, or you're not?
No, I'm not. I didn't vote initially, but because I'm in unison, I've got until the 24th of November. But Danny Kelly made me feel 1,000 shames last week. So I've asked for my ballot paper to be resent, and I'm going to send it saying no.
Danny Kelly's here.
What did you say?
Well, what did you say?
First of all, I want to pay tribute to that lady in Middlesbrough. She does a fabulous job here. My point with Julie last week was that she should have made her feelings known on the ballot box. Yeah. So what Julie did last week, she just didn't fill it out and send it back. And I said that if it was me, I'd have made my feelings known. And I'm sorry to make you feel embarrassed, Julie. That was never my intention, because I think you do a wonderful job. And I'm glad, if you like, that you and I have found common ground with this.
Yeah, me too.
Well, good. I'm glad you found common ground. I'm glad he was there to speak, to talk to you. Can I bring Mark back into this as well? Because Mark Francois also there. Mark, now I know you said that you declared an interest that your partner, your wife, works with the NHS as well. The feelings of Julie, that Julie has, are they sort of, in your view, kind of a common shared view for most of the nurses who are potentially going to go on strike?
Well, from what I hear, I'm sure what Julie has said is not unrepresentative. So I think if you stop 100 people walking down a high street and say, do you think nurses should be given a good pay rise? 98 of those people are going to say yes. The nub of it comes how you then manage to afford to do it without taking money away from other areas of the NHS as well. So I think we need, do we need to put more money into the NHS? Well, I think we've been putting billions and billions more in for years. Some of that has gone into pay for nurses and doctors and other clinicians, which I think is a good thing. But we also need to look at how much of that money has ended up, being spent on bureaucracy that perhaps we could do with less of. So I think there are very legitimate demands from people at the coalface for more money for clinical staff. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that we need to see if we've got the balance right between what we're paying the clinical staff, who are actually dealing with the patients on a day-to-day basis, and the very senior managers who aren't. So I think, we need to look at that balance again and see if we got it the right way round.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Mark. And Julie, I'll give the last word to you then. In terms of the pay, and obviously I don't believe the nurses are paid well. I think they should be paid more. I'm concerned with regard to a strike as to how it will affect everyday people, because obviously that's what will be the problem. Do you think that perhaps if we could find some more of that money through cutting down the bureaucracy, do you think that's one of the things that we seriously need to be looking at?
I think that would probably work and go some way to helping. But one of the main things I'd like Mark to have a think about here is we pay 423 million a year to agency staff because there's not enough nurses, because we can't recruit nurses. We've lost 25,000 nurses just in the last year. Can't we use that money instead? Just up the wages and don't use agency? Is that not something we could consider?
Well, I'll give Mark a chance to reply to that. What do you think? Very briefly, Mark, you've got about 30 seconds.
Well, there's definitely been a trend where, if you like, full-time staff have been going part-time and then working through agencies. And of course, when they do that, which is entirely their choice, what that does is it tends to increase the pressure on the full-time staff who remain. So I think we do need to look at that balance between full-time staff and part-time staff. Sometimes people go part-time for family reasons because of family commitments, which is completely understandable. But again, if you get the balance wrong, as I think Julie is indicating, what you end up with is too many full-time staff leave, become part-time, and then you then get into a bit of a spiral where you increase the pressure on the full-time staff, and some of them think, I've had enough of this, and then they leave, and it gets worse and worse. The NHS England has been working for a long while on a new NHS workforce plan, which is meant to address this challenge. Everyone's been waiting for this, but again, as it came out at the PAC, they still haven't finished it. They're hoping to finish it by Christmas, and ministers haven't even got it yet. So the quicker the bureaucrats get on with the workforce plan, the better, and hopefully there'll be stuff in there that will persuade Julie's colleagues not to leave the profession.